Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Love First Christians Bible study. I'm joined by Patty. Hi,
Hey.
Patty. Hello. And if you would like to join, there's a link in the comments in the description to the video that I've sent out. So if you're watching this at all, you can find it as well. Boy, we got a lot of people last time, and we've already started off with a bang here with some people watching. So that's good news that people are interested in this kind of thing.
Well, who wouldn't be interested in Esther, right? I mean, because Esther has everything you want. I mean, it's literally it's a fairy tale with a bit of a horror story, grim fairy tale. The whole horror story put in with the happy ending, I guess.
Yeah, happy ending unless you wanted to genocide people, and then which
happy ending genocide didn't happen, right? Well, it kind of didn't happen. It kind of did happen, but not to the Jews. A lot of people got slaughtered in the end. Just the way all Bible stories seem to end.
Right. Somebody's dying.
Someone died.
Us or them. We'll figure it out after this here.
Right? Bible stories, somebody's dying.
It's only 10 chapters, and you pointed out, and I found this interesting, that between it and between Esther and Song of Songs, and kind of Song of Songs, but this is Esther's like the one book that truly does not actually mention God.
Never mentions God. Yeah. Is it Song of Solomon or the Psalms?
Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. It depends on your. I let people. I have a degree in theology, but I let those. I am aware of the controversy.
Yeah.
My level of caring is a bit tepid on that one, so I just kind of.
That's okay, because once we start talking about Esther, some people call him Ahasuerus, some people call him Xerxes. I mean, we're not going to get the king's name right, anyways. I mean, so
right.
Pronunciations. We already apologize, because do you call him Xerxes or Ahasuerus, or what do you call the king?
I call him Xerxes, and I'll give you why. I feel Xerxes is a cooler name.
Yeah, it is.
First of all, secondly, and I did look into this, like, who is this? Like, because the Jewish word for it is Ahasuerus.
Yeah.
Which in most translations, including your KJV, is going to just get translated automatically to Xerxes. Although that is not. It is actually the name of the word Xerxes from like Persian in the Hebrew to the Persian. So that's what I call it. There are also, I looked on this before the Bible study this week. Most scholars actually do recognize it as Xerxes the First and not Artaxerxes. So, or a different king of some kind. And it's nice when you do have like this much agreement. Of course, like with everything in the Bible, it's not 100%. Feel free, do your own research, study it around, give it a look. But to me, there was enough there to indicate that it's Xerxes. And I just feel Xerxes is easier to say. So I just...
I'll call him Xerxes. Yeah. Okay, so now do we call her Esther, or do we call her? No, kidding.
Esther, yeah.
We have all these names for people, like Esther. There's a I forget what is it, Hadassah? Was that her name?
You're talking about the queen,
Vashti. The original name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Everybody keeps getting renamed in Esther, so you have to agree on names before you talk about it. We'll agree to call her Esther, not Hadassah, right? Wasn't that her Jewish name?
Something like that, and that one, like, beyond everybody just says Esther, and I'm so fine with that. It's got a silent th, I guess, that just translates to a hard t, and I'm like, you know what, that's good enough for me. I don't need to hurt myself trying to figure this out any further than I've already got it at. We have Alexander Keller joining us, a good friend of mine, and I believe he's here. Alexander, if you can hear me.
Yes, I'm here.
There he is. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good.
Good. Well, let's get started on some Esther here. So, it's action-packed. It's nice. It's like we got the action sequence in Exodus, but only the action sequence from Exodus with all the other stuff to discuss. So there's less to discuss, which I like because that means I can go into it in more detail, which is very nice. So right off the bat, we have Queen Vashti, who is summoned to go before King Xerxes, and she just doesn't. And she's not a character in the story because she never shows up. She's not referenced. Xerxes tries to get the law involved because she doesn't want to show up. And the law's like, best you can do is just say, like, set her free and not have her see you again. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the reward she was going for. So sure. So Vashti, Queen of Xerxes, or wife of Xerxes, one of them anyway, decides she doesn't want to see him for whatever reason. I have looked into this reason historically. There is not a consensus here. Some argue that because she said showing up wearing the crown. Some argue that that he was saying showing up wearing just the crown.
Yeah.
And so she did not want to display her nudity because he was bragging to all his friends how hot his wife was. This was
well, and okay, wait, let's have some moments here because, like, I was actually like Esther was the first Bible story I learned, and my mother, she like that Vashti, we called her Vashti. So she was the person like what names. She was the one that my mother really identified with. My mother named her horse after Vashti, right? I mean, that was because she felt like she was the most misunderstood and most put upon person in the Bible. My mother just like related to her so much because here's this woman who's like having her own party. She's doing everything right according to culture. And then her husband gets blasted drunk at a 7-day party, which, needs to put out there. He's like, and he's bragging to his friends about how hot his wife is. He orders her to come in. And like, we're not really sure whether he asked her to come in wearing just the crown and nothing else, which would have been inappropriate, or if he asked her to come in unveiled, which again would have been inappropriate, or whatever reason, but the best we can figure out is that there's something culturally inappropriate. So like, she's damned if she does, she's damned if she doesn't, right? And it's like, oh my God, what do you do if you're Vashti, right? I mean, it's like what a rotten thing to do to her. And by the way, his friends suck. We're just gonna say like his friends suck, and he isn't much of a husband either, So yeah, so like she gets punished for his rotten behavior, which when he sobers up, he's not for particularly like he kind of goes on like what a 4-year, like he just goes off to war and just starts killing things because you can tell like he's not particularly happy about what he did, and his friends are like, let's cheer you up, let's have a beauty pageant, let's go grab some hot women, dudes.
Not totally inaccurate. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, so I quickly skimmed it so that I could refresh my memory on what Esther covered.
Yeah.
And the thought process that went through my mind is that the king is essentially Robert Baratheon.
Okay.
From Game of Thrones. If y'all
explain.
So Robert Baratheon is a boozer. He's a warrior. He came to the throne through violence. Like that's how he got to power in the first place. And it's like a warrior in the peak of his prime, plus 20 years of drinking and sedentary lifestyle. And yeah, he's just a drunken carouser. Yeah, that was the first thought process that came to my mind. But then yeah, so y'all are talking about Vashti, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or as I say Vashti, so we'll go with Vashti.
Yeah. So I found it really curious that after this point, she doesn't seem to exist anymore.
She doesn't. Yeah, no, she just gets banished, right? She's gone. She's on an island somewhere.
Is she explicitly banished, or does she just like fade out of the story into irrelevance?
No, she's banished.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
They don't kill her; they banish her. Because I think what they say is that they banish her, right, Hootie?
Yeah, she is not mentioned within the Bible. We have information about her historically, and who we believe she was. But again, this always gets a little messy when you try to, especially when you've got multiple wives and different things happen to them and everything's like that. But this does appear to be a real person who was banished for something, basically this story. She decided she didn't want to show up on call, and so she didn't show up. The king tried to get the law involved to see if like he could like kill her, divorce her, like what are his options here for when somebody insults him like that, because she didn't feel like showing up. And they're like, best we can do is like banish her. And she's like, all right, that's what I wanted anyway, and really want to get tied to you anyhow. So things actually work out okay for Vashti. As with many biblical stories, it's usually a good thing if you're not in them, because that means you're going to have a pretty good ending. So her ending is actually okay. It's funny because the majority of the historical writings we have of her regard her as wicked and vain because she didn't want to respond to the king and everything. So like what we find from her historically is bashing her. And of course, thanks to all these modern sensibilities that we have come to see her as a true heroine, really, and is somebody who is spoken of quite nicely. It's funny because even in Jewish texts, she's kind of like, oh, she wasn't subservient, but we were better because we were more subservient. And we kind of look at those texts now and we're just kind of like, oh, we really judged her poorly. And even in the Bible, it seems to indicate that Vashti was a pretty good person, or at least stood up for herself in a way that was impressive, and a way the Bible that recognizes is like, yeah, that's a legitimate thing to do. She's a contrast with Esther because Esther kind of plays the game and she decides not to play the game. And I like that the Bible kind of says, like, do what's right in your heart. Vashti did the right thing and Esther did the right thing, even though those actions were different. It depends on your personality. It depends on what you're willing to do. There's different ethics at play here. They're not necessarily at contrast with each other. But if you feel that it's paradoxical, it's just something to search your conscience and do the right thing. She decided she didn't want to show up on call, and she was okay. That's what I get from her.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Vashti before we move on to somebody else? Okay. So we have a lot of secret keeping then that starts with this, because Esther, at the advice of Malachi, her cousin, Malachi advises her to not disclose her nationality. In this case, and this is kind of an interesting historical point as well, she is by all, we are talking about ethnic Judaism that she is hiding, because by all historic accounts, as well as accounts within this book, she's actually practicing Persian. Down to everything. This is not somebody who was the Daniel and I won't pray to your gods. This was not somebody, and I'm not saying that Esther, I'm not trying to portray as a person of poor character. Simply, this is the state of the Jews at that time. There actually is a strict Jewish rule against marrying somebody that is not a Jew. And that rule is so strict, they actually have a policy for, like, even on the threat of death, you are to refuse marrying a non-Jew. And so there's a lot of Talmudic and rabbinic literature on this that tries to explain. Some just give and say, yeah, Esther was a villain and we just don't know it. That's not my particular interpretation. However, that is one of them. The other is that it tries to create a new idea of why it was okay for her to marry. Some say it was because Mordecai set it up and it was his idea. So therefore, that's not her ethic, that was his. Others say that, well, it's one thing to save your own life or the life of another. It's another thing to, like, stop a genocide. And so that's the point where it's okay to marry somebody. It's not spelled out here. All we have is the example. It's I actually really like stories in the Bible like this that don't try to insert the why. It leaves it for the reader to figure out. And with the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we can kind of arrive at the conclusions we're meant to arrive to. So any thoughts on hiding one's identity, ethnicity, marrying outside of the faith? All that's kind of being discussed here.
Yeah, well, so like how Esther gets involved in what I like to call the beauty pageant of the year is interesting, right? Because like, the whole idea of this whole, like, beauty pageant thing is because it wasn't the king's idea. It's his friend's idea, right? His friends say, dude, you got to get married. You got to find a queen. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to find all the hottest women in the land, and we're going to bring them to the kingdom, and you're going to get to pick them all, right? And so Mordecai says, hey, I've got this this ward that I'm taking care of, and she's pretty good looking. So we're going to throw her into the mix. And he's the one who told her to hide her identity. right? So she's kind of innocent and young, and who wouldn't want to live in a palace, right? I mean, but she's kind of just following what he's telling her to do. Like, she's hiding her identity because she's being told to do it. And it's a job, right? I mean, like, she can live in squalor with everybody else, or she can move into the palace and be Esther. I mean, it's like, I kind of call it a good career move more than anything else. I mean,
Right.
right? I mean, like, back then you didn't have too many options, especially if you were a woman, on moving ahead. I mean, so I think this was a pretty good career move on her. And I don't, God didn't punish her at all. And later on, it turns out this was like the best career move for the Jews too. I mean, this was, and Mordecai says the reason why you're here, the reason why, God did all this was to get you here to protect all of us. So yeah, I don't have problems with hiding your identity if you have to.
Aaron or Alex?
I agree, but it is interestingly not scriptural. Like, it's very pragmatic in a way that the Bible doesn't normally do, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I like I said, I like that it's it allows us to insert some common sense or some doing the best we can with what we got into ordinarily something that is very dogmatic. We talked about this a lot with Exodus, where it's like rules and then exceptions to rules, and this is the nature of law, right? You set a policy, but then you find that policy one size doesn't fit all on it. And so I like the story of Esther and its inclusion into the scriptures and into the Apocrypha, because it is so it's contrary in a way that's just a story, which, like, I like Jesus with the parables. I'm not going to hit you over the head with the moral, but you can deduce from it what you will. So yeah, if it makes a better life for yourself. Alex, any thoughts on this? That's okay. If you're talking, I believe you're muted. Okay, good. We're good. Okay. That went quicker than I thought it would go. A lot of times there's like some debate there, but I think we're all kind of on the same page as far as do what you got to do. I'm not saying secrets are good. I'm not saying secrets are bad. I think most of the time the truth will set you free. But of course, like, if somebody's like, where are the Jews? And they're in your attic, don't say your attic. Like, this is one of those where it's like, yes, the Bible says don't bear false witness, but sometimes it's okay to bear false witness, right? Like, and this is not like the general policy of truth is great. The general policy of marrying someone who you love and you share a faith with is great. Like, I would never disparage any of that. But if your life circumstance takes you to the point where you got to stop a genocide, and maybe just even at the moment, because she doesn't know her destiny is to stop this genocide, but just to get some good grace for the Jews who are not in good graces among the Persians, that maybe this is what you do. And we do see things like that in Daniel and Ezekiel and Jeremiah when they're going through their captivity, of just being like, listen, I'm not telling you to throw a Molotov at every single guard that you see, as offensive as they may be. Like, play the game. It's okay. Like, and I'm not saying like be subversive or evil or murderous or anything like that, even though this is what this does devolve into, of course. But
Wait, can I say something else on that one too, though? Because more likely than not, they probably, they probably weren't thinking, well, she's going to end up being the queen and she's going to end up deceiving, Xerxes, right? I mean, what they probably figure, because you have to really, like, again, you have to take people where they are, not what actually happened, because we know how the story ends. Mordecai, Esther, they don't know how the story ends. This is probably how, because I like to think of like how would I have seen it had I been them, and how I would have seen it is that you've got this girl. She's not particularly sophisticated. Of course, she's beautiful, but she is competing with the most beautiful women in the country, and some of these women are coming from pretty good families, right? I mean, they have been raised to be the wives of kings and princes and things like that, and this is what she's going into. I would think if I was Esther, my chances of getting that crown is about 0. So probably more likely than not, what Mordecai is probably thinking is get her into that palace, because once she's had sex with the king, once she's going to go into the concubine, area, and she's never going to have sex with him again. She's going to live a comfortable lifestyle, and she's never going to have to want for anything again. And he's probably thinking that, and she's probably thinking that, and it's like, well, this is a way just to get out of the fields and get out of the hard life, and they're probably not thinking anything beyond that. It probably wasn't a game of like deception. It was just like, this is a way to get out of your station of life and to get into a more comfortable way of life. I don't think it was ever an issue. I don't think they were thinking of deception. Like, we're going to deceive the king when I become the queen. It's like, I don't think they thought that big. I wouldn't have thought that big. Would you?
No.
I don't know. I mean, like,
really, you really thought you would have been queen? Like, you're coming out of the fields of Jew, coming out of the fields. You think you're going to be queen? Come on.
I mean, they did from the moment that the king was introduced. He was introduced as this wildly unpredictable drunk, and I feel like there was always that perception that, like, well, who knows? Maybe this will work. Like really. So a wild drunk who gives 7-day parties and asks his wife to come before them naked is going to be enchanted by some little prudish Jewish girl? Come on. This is not his type. I mean, this is not his type. If I was Mordecai, I would be like, this is the antithesis of the girl that's going to charm him. I wouldn't think that. Really, you really think like you be thinking she has a shot at the king? Really?
Well, there's a little hint I kind of took away from the first book. If you see the part where it says his reign spanned all the way to Ethiopia, that's where a lot of people believe Christianity started and where, Adam and Eve landed. And it's kind of like one of those things where you read the location they mention, and it's like, if the bad guy, I guess you could say Xerxes owns that location, there might be something the guy's working up to, get that guy out of power. And somebody might take him down, like Moses or Esther or any of these other figures. There's that chance that they could rock the boat.
Yeah, but you think they're thinking that? Yeah, the only time I heard anything on this that actually made any sense at all on this was that, like, if Mordecai was paying any attention, which would go totally, counterintuitive to the Robert Baratheon analogy, is that the king actually loved Vashti. And that he regretted, like, when he got sober, he like regretted what he did, because he actually got rid of like somebody like that he liked. Like, this was like somebody he liked, and that's when he went on his 4-year killing spree. And his friends were like, "Dude, we got to cheer him up. Let's have a beauty queen contestant. Let's bring all the beautiful women in, because who wouldn't love that, right?" And so they're doing this to cheer him up. And that when he actually meets Esther, he meets the only non-vapid woman in the whole group, which is why he's attracted to her. And Mordecai, who's kind of like hanging out on the outskirts, realizes this and sees Esther and thinks, this guy is actually looking for a companion. He's lonely. She might have a shot. I mean, in that instance, I could see, well, yeah, then he's actually, he thinks she has a shot because she's beautiful and she's not vapid and she's kind and she's got all these qualities that a lonely king would want. And then in that case, I would say, yeah, then they're playing a deceptive game. But on the other hand, if he's really like a Robert Baratheon, it's like, nah, they didn't think she had a shot. So. I mean,
if I wonder, because like, to continue along the Robert Baratheon angle, Robert fell for Cersei, and Cersei was absolutely not. She was also.
Did he really fall for her? I mean, he didn't fall for her. He really didn't.
I know that there was a big scene in season 1 or 2. I think it was in late season 1 or maybe early season 2, where they have a conversation in their bedroom, and he's like, there really was a time that we once loved each other, wasn't there? And they both agreed that, like, early on in their relationship, they actually did love one another.
Sorry, I think I got my characters mixed up for a second there. Oh, okay, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Okay, yeah.
And with the if you view Esther as a schemer, she could fit the Cersei archetype. Like
Yeah,
I don't necessarily, I don't think that she's that
yeah,
manipulative. I
yeah.
don't, but I also don't think she's as naive as you're maybe thinking she is either. Like I feel
No,
like there's a middle ground there. Um, I don't know why I'm trying to like hammer this Game of Thrones reference in there.
yeah, I have a hard time thinking that Esther would be anything less than completely innocent, only because of how she would have been raised, where she would have been at. She wouldn't have had any life experience to be manipulative. Right? She wouldn't have had any of those. She wouldn't have the ability to learn any of those skills. She would have had to learn that in the palace. Because she would so the way it said Mordecai took care of her, she was pretty isolated where she was. So she wouldn't have really had the ability to learn any social manipulation skills. So she would have just been doing like any good child would have, listening to her elders. So the manipulation would have had to come from Mordecai.
Yeah.
And so the question comes in, why would Mordecai tell her to lie? Either A, because he saw a long game, or B, because he just thought this is the way to get you safe and protected. And I tend to think it was more to keep her safe and protected, because isn't that what every parent wants?
A lot of Esther, I find her to be, because this is where we get a lot of the anti-Semitic stereotype of like the crafty Jews, right?
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of that comes from stories like Esther. And what I find that's lost as we read through this story, as we keep going, is while yes, they did hide their nationality for like a good reason. These are not beloved people. Haman is already in power. We're going to get to him right after this. Haman already has the ear of the king. He is not friendly to Jews. This has already happened, right? Like, and so that you could say is preemptive, but for me, it's actually very reactive. It's very, Haman hates Jews, so therefore don't say you're a Jew. Otherwise you're going to get killed, or you have no chance. A lot of what Haman does is like, all of a sudden, okay, now what are we going to do? And yeah, it's a little tricksy, but it's reaction tricksy. This is a reaction to somebody attempting to kill you or somebody attempting to oppress you. And this is your reaction to it, as opposed to like, like I tend to think as like a schemer, as somebody who makes the scheme, right? When we say schematic, right? You lay out the blueprints. These guys aren't laying out the blueprints.
Right.
They're just trying to
build gallows in their backyards to hang somebody.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that I didn't know where to bring it up, because it's throughout the entire story rather than one specific point. But both Haman and Xerxes are so wildly hyperbolic that it's almost fantastical. Like they don't do anything in moderation.
Yeah. Power corrupts, kids. This is just remember that one. All right, so moving to Haman, who has the ear of Xerxes. Haman is described as an Agagite. Now, this is just some interesting tidbits from here. Agagite is not actually a recognized ethnicity. Agag is a king you will find within the Bible, but that's not like that. Nobody would call themselves an Agagite. It'd be like calling yourself like a Bidenist, like, you know what I mean? Like if you were like white, like, you know what I mean? Or like you voted Democrat at some point. It's like that isn't really a word, right? Like that's not what we use. So there's a couple of thoughts on this. Agagite is actually like a spiritual person. So you come with like as one would say, a Bidenist. That would just mean that like you have that same spirit of Joe Biden, so to speak. So in this case, he would come with the spirit of Agag, who was the king that Saul was opposing in the Canaanite, the Philistine wars. These are, and I think this is perhaps the more interesting point. Haman is a Canaanite, which is a descendant of the Jews. This guy is and this is both historically accurate as well as something that is described in the Bible. And I think too many scholars kind of lose sight on this. The Canaanites and the Jews have the same heritage. Like if you were to test for ethnic Judaism, there would be no way to isolate that from the Canaanites. And that's true whether you're looking at historical artifacts or like looking at bone structure, whatever it may be. Obviously different cultures. Obviously one comes from the grandson of Esau, stayed there. The other ones go to Egypt, right? Like I totally get that they come from different lifestyles. However, there is no sense of irony lost that Haman is not looking to execute practicing Jews, but ethnic Semites, of which he is one. And Haman is essentially that sellout who is like, kill those people because I hate them, because I'm trying so much to get on your side. The Canaanites are not themselves beloved in Persia. Haman is just somebody who worked his way up the system. He is also the schemer, the tricksy, whatever he may be, has managed to grab the ear of the king and is calling the execution of his enemies, who are basically exactly like him. This is another kind of how power works in politics kind of situation, when it's like, I'm going to use this upper hammer to smash the people that I have a problem with, and the enemy of my enemy will just be my friend for a bit. I found that all very interesting when I was looking into Haman.
But the reason why Haman wanted the Jews killed was because he hated Mordecai. I mean, that's what started the whole thing.
Yeah.
Mordecai was mad at him, right? He gets all upset because Mordecai refuses to give him respect. And so his solution to it is, well, I'm just going to kill all the Jews to get even with Mordecai. It's like, what, dude? That's like when you say he's, Alex, when you say he's like hyperbolic and reactive, it's like, yes, oh my gosh. And he uses the power of the government. Well, that was a libertarian statement, to kill everybody because he's mad at one guy. It's like, that is like, oh my gosh, how insane and demonic is that?
Yeah, I was listening to your explanation of his viewing himself as an Agagite, and I was thinking, now we wouldn't, like when you use Biden as an example, we wouldn't call ourselves a Bidenite. That doesn't make any sense. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and if you attach reverence, like genuine reverence, to a politician, I could see yourself, and I'm not even going to take a modern example and say like Trump or something like that. Yeah. But I was actually thinking Thatcherite is a term, Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. And like that I could see, like if you revere a politician to the point where you would identify them with like as a base part of your identity. I mean, maybe Agag is somebody he revered to the point where he identified himself as such. And that would play into the example of the fanaticism of like, somebody scorned me and therefore I'm going to kill their entire ethnicity.
Yeah.
I don't know if he gave himself that title. It's possible. Like it could be also a derogatory term, like when you call somebody a Trumper, for example, right? Yeah. Like Trumpers don't call themselves Trumpers, right? This is a word that's applied to them. So it could be that he obviously comes with the spirit of Agag. I think that's hardly in doubt. He is down for genocide. I believe he had this idea, and I think that my guess is it's the straw that breaks the camel's back on this one here, that he's like, or I don't want to say straw breaks the camel's back. I'd rather say that there are certain like warning signs, and you'll see this when people get like, oh, this, the foreigners stop bowing before me. Now they control the country just because they walk next to me like normal people. I'm freaking out about the foreigners. I liked it better when they were very subservient. Whatever I can get for you, master, please. Like, and so like there's this element of it being like, that's the moment you're looking for when all of a sudden they don't bow before you anymore. And you're like, oh no, they see themselves as like my equals in this society. Like, or even if they're not equals, they hold no, at this moment, they don't know about Esther. They hold no positions of power, right? Like these people are very put upon. And so all it takes is simply not bowing before this guy to be like, let's cut this right here.
They have to die now. Right? Yeah, they didn't vow; they have to die. It's just people get into weird headspaces, and they hold on to it. And he's a perfect example of somebody who went into a weird headspace, and that conversation in his head just wouldn't turn off.
There's a couple other anti-Semitic stereotypes that come about from Haman as well. He tries to get into positions of power, and the way he maintains that position of power is by payment. That's actually explicitly here, as well as in when we look at history, that the way he's able to maintain his position with Xerxes is payment. He has a lot of wealth and stuff, and is willing to send a ton of it through taxation and from his land and his workers, and is willing to send it to Xerxes, and it's appreciated. As always, when you don't have to fight, there are a lot people think about wars, especially with Xerxes. When we think about his escapades in Greece, we actually often don't think about the wars that are avoided when we look at history, because a lot of times Alexander the Great conquered a lot of worlds. He didn't fight very many battles, because a lot of this was like, hey, I could siege this whole city and take 100% of whatever is left after I blow you up. Or how about you just give me 20%? We call you a Greek colony. We good? We avoid all that bloodshed? And most people go, yeah, I guess that's good. I don't really want to die. So like, I guess that works. And in this time period, this is what has happened to the Canaanites. And, during this time period is, yeah, they have land, they have stuff. They could, of course, be subject to a Persian invasion, in which case the Persians would roll them. But it's much easier to just get that stuff for free, not risk any bloodshed. And this guy Haman is the facilitator of that, willing to send a lot of money over there to maintain his position on Xerxes' court. It's the danger of money. I mean, the love of money being the root of all evil. When you are able to, when you love your money, which again, Haman, I can't stress this enough, he's taking the money from, it's not his. This is taxation in a nutshell, right? Like, it's not his, but he's the leader of them. So he's taking it and he's giving it there, and he's the one who's receiving all these benefits. These guys just receive the benefits of not getting attacked by the Persians, which, if we know anything about them, they actually would probably might be okay for a fight, as opposed to just giving all this up for free. It's beyond just, when we talk about taxation, I think a lot of us just think like money. This would also involve people conscripted into armies. This involves firstborn sons. This involves, it's a lot that you give up when you bow to the crown. And Haman is willing to give all of that in exchange for a lot of status for himself. Haman is already a villain by the time this begins. Malachi sets him off, and now we've got that. Any other Haman talk before we get to the action?
Well, I just want to say, it's like, if you really want to get into, when the Bible talks about, vanity, is, some of the great sins of man, and one of them is vanity. Haman is a perfect example of that. I mean, he really exemplifies so many of, like, we have the fruits of the Spirit. Haman is literally the opposite of that. And like I said, like, Esther was the first Bible story I ever learned. And it was just like, and I think it's because, like, my grandmother taught it to my mother, and my mother taught it to me, and my grandmother and I, like, we bonded over Esther, and I loved Esther so much. And I learned so much about, like, how to be a person, a good person based on Esther. And it was always, like my grandmother used to tell me, whenever I'd, like, want to be vengeful, she'd say, don't get caught on Haman's noose, don't hang yourself, like Haman's gallows. You can always, you build Haman's gallows, you're going to die on it, and things like that. Because, Haman is a perfect example of somebody who like, he hated so easily, and it was because of his vanity, and it was because of everything that was the antithesis of God. And you see, he's one of those people where you actually see him get all the justice that God has in store, which I think is this way. I think Esther becomes a great Bible story, because you actually see the immediate justice get doled out for somebody who actually does the antithesis of everything that God is about, which I personally love about Esther. If you really want, when we get into what happens to Haman, but, like, don't whatever you do, don't get caught on Haman's gallows. Don't build a gallows for somebody else, because chances are you're going to die on Haman's gallows. Don't do it. I mean, this is a great lesson for people. And so that's, don't be Haman. Like, everybody listen, don't be Haman. Let go of vanity and let go of vengeance. Those are the two things that if you don't learn anything else from Esther, learn that. Don't be Haman. It always comes back on you.
Between Esther and Haman, we have a right way and a wrong way to deal with the protection of your people. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people would look at Haman and be sympathetic, to be like, well, we've been trying to fight each other forever, right? Canaanites and the Jews, I guess, have been fighting each other forever. And this is just me protecting my people in this way. And Esther is just like, I'm protecting my people in this way. And yet God smiles on one and not on the other. And like you said, Haman decides to pick up the sword and dies by that sword. So getting into this a little bit.
And then we're gonna show why Esther's was right and Haman's was wrong, though, because one was an antagonist and one was reacting to the antagonizing. So yeah, go ahead.
Right. So one of the things that I like about Esther is, as opposed to, as you said, this was her option, Patty, was to just be a concubine type wife, be the showgirl. You have sex with this guy once every so often, maybe once ever, but maybe once whenever he's feeling it. And other than that, you live a life of luxury. And instead, she chooses to endear herself to Xerxes, not just physically, but personally. She chooses to become a confidant to him, to be somebody close to him, to be somebody that he talks to. And this was not something that she had to do if she just wanted to live her own life. And one would completely understand him being like, oh, I want a beauty contest for this drunk guy. Like, I hate this dude. Like, why should I give him anything? But her kindness that he does not deserve with him results in a fantastic benefit that she doesn't even necessarily know about. Like, she doesn't know she's going to have to use, like, she's not kind to him to utilize some kind of leverage power over. She doesn't plan on ever disclosing her ethnicity. And yet, when it comes up that this is what it has to do. So Mordecai refuses to bow. Haman comes up with this idea to execute all of these Jews. There's so many of them. As is usual, they become less respectful towards authority. They seem to be very smart. They seem to have a lot of these strange traditions, creates this hostile buzz. And maybe the time is now to just put them down. You've got plenty of other slaves and such anyway. You don't need this class, especially if they're no longer going to bow before we, the amazing people. And I like how Haman is using the royal we to throw himself in with Xerxes, even though they are not related in any way. But he's like, I'm one of you. We don't want these people to like overtake us. It's similar to kind of the anti-foreigner sentiment you get from, you know, an Irish white person and an English white person and a German white person together. And they're just like, all of a sudden we're the we and they're all the foreigners. Like, and it's like, but you're just as foreign as anybody else. Like, what are you saying? Like, yeah, you're all foreigners here. So what are you talking about? So, and so we get, Esther only finds herself with this opportunity because she has chosen to treat Xerxes better than he deserves and become a close confidant to him. I guess any thoughts on that? There you go.
Okay, so I think you bring up some really, really great things about Esther, which is, you have this young girl. She, because we know she's a young girl. I mean, we know that she comes into this court and like from the minute she walks in, she starts gathering favor with everybody in the court. Like everybody is just enchanted by her, and we know she's unsophisticated because she's out in the middle of nowhere when she comes in. Like it's like she doesn't belong with the others. I mean, because we know like a lot of the other women that are coming in, they have been bred to be with kings and princes. Again, they're, I think of like Esther as just like this, probably like she would have been like me walking in like my head on a swivel the whole time, like, oh my God, like that would have been me inside the king's palace, and I'm sure that was Esther. And you can really see her naivete when it comes down to when she goes and finally gets called before the king, and she can take anything she wants, and she takes, she asks like her mentor, what do I bring? I mean, she doesn't know what to bring, where everybody else is like grabbing jewels and everything else because like this is your payday, and that just kind of shows her sweetness and her naivety. And I think like like she didn't know, like like she was too young and naive to understand that the king could have anybody. He could have all these beautiful women, but like what he couldn't have was that sweetness and that kindness. That was something that was God given, and that genuineness, and I think that was like God, like the king didn't deserve her. Like Xerxes did not deserve Esther. And like we always think about like what Esther got out of it. Well, the king got something out of it too. I mean, he was pretty rotten to his first wife. So God actually ends up blessing him, where he's got this palace full of all these vapid women who are like literally grabbing his gold, and they're having a grand time, and they're trying to scheme and figure out how they can be queen. And he's got this very sweet girl who just walks in, and she doesn't really get any of it, but she manages to have this naivety that touches him, that allows him to find somebody, and he makes her queen. I mean, he literally crowns her queen. But then he does something which comes up later, which Xerxes, because this comes up later, and we'll talk about it later, that he actually ends up, because I think Esther falls in love with the king, because he actually ends up kind of breaking her heart later, because when Mordecai comes to her and says, look, we're all going to die, lady, you got to go to the king, you got to help us out. And she says, the king hasn't called me like in over a month. Like, I can't go to him. And that was kind of interesting that she didn't say, well, I can only go when the king calls me. She actually knows how long it's been since she's seen the king, which means she knows he's sleeping with other women. And she expresses a hesitancy to go to him, which says that she's not very sure that he loves her, but you can feel like she loves him. And she like does all this stuff to try to get him, to let him know that she loves him. And I think, dude, you didn't deserve her, And even when you're rotten to people, God still gives you and blesses you, which is what he needed to feel that, which is actually what I think warmed his heart to protect her, which is actually what I think saved the Jews. And I don't think people really like see that part of the story with Esther. And again, I go back to, that's why I don't think she was manipulative. I think she was a very sweet, gentle girl. And I think it comes out in the story when you see like everything she does, like she's very kind. Like even when Mordecai like she's like, I don't want to die. And he's like, well, you're going to die no matter what. And she's like, okay. I'll do what you want. Like, she's just like, okay, okay, fine. Like, I don't want to die, but if I die, I die. And it's like, oh, golly, Esther, that wasn't a whole lot of fighting there. It's like, well, Mordecai says it. So, okay. It's like, gee, big crickets. So I really just adore her. I would love to have her sweetness and her kindness. I mean, even when Haman tries to like fall on her to save her, she's not like punching him in the face saying, you want to kill her. she's never mean to anybody. She's a very sweet girl. So
yeah.
And I think sweetness and kindness go a long way. And I think with Esther, she proves to us sweetness and kindness go a long way. But like in the end, she's not quite so sweet and kind. So,
I don't like it when, I think it's a discussion I see in the circles that I float in recently, that if you don't do violence, you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
But I find that using kindness, I don't want to say as a sword, because that makes it sound like I'm trying to accomplish violence with it, but as a tool is extremely effective. Whereas I find violence to be extremely ineffective. Mm-hmm. We have examples of it's funny. We had two in a day. We had the Stonehenge protesters and then the woman blocking the abortion clinic. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too political, but this is one of those ways that, like, to me, the Bible becomes real, is that they say, well, without these things, like, what else can I do? And my answer is about anything else, would have been the right thing to do. Yeah. You have made your position less popular by your actions. You'll notice that the people promoting both are the exact people that you were fighting against. They're like, look at what an idiot you are. Look at what an idiot you are. And it's like, and now all that's being pumped up is like, and it's like they said, like, it's like, well, we got to do something. It's got to be inconvenient. It's got to be in your face. Why can't it be kindness? Yeah. Since when has kindness failed to function?
Yeah.
like with people, as human interactions. Like
Yeah.
if we are all just family members aiming guns at each other constantly, is that the way a family works?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And so, yeah, I love the story of Esther because to me, this is my go-to. Like I'm a peace first, like violence if the Holy Spirit compels you to do that, and even then check many times to make sure it's the Holy Spirit telling you to do that. But like pacifism to me is my standard, and being kind and being good to people. And I have an extreme amount, to me in my life, I have so much more effectiveness and persuasiveness with kindness than I ever had by speaking ill to people. And I get caught up in speaking ill to people as well, like when we have this serious disagreement. And it sucks because as soon as I go there, I'm basically have no chance of changing this person's mind, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if I see something and when I'm in my best mindset, I see something, maybe even reprehensible or whatever I want to say that I disagree with, and I take a second and I go, I think I can compliment sandwich this, like, or some way that I can just be like, let me treat them with kindness to the point where they will actually listen to me when I'm like, hey, I really like this, this, and this from you. This one doesn't seem to land very well, and I'm struggling to make this work. But I say this as somebody who loves you and cares about you. They actually take my criticism well. It's one of those things. Like I have just become. I don't know that I will ever be like mega church evangelists, but I wonder how many people they actually evangelize, because they tend to just latch on to people who are already Christians, who are already raised with them on TV, and that's it. Whereas the people that I tend to find tend to be atheists or like people who've been disaffected from the church or something like that. And then they like, I actually get to see their change when with a lot of kindness, and holding hell over their heads or holding violence over their heads. It's just, to me, it's been ineffective. I don't see it in the real world. And I just, from my own personal experience as somebody who used to be very big on like hell and damnation, I just have not seen that same level of effectiveness. I just am more effective with the kind way. And I think that we need to think of it more as a tool and less of it as just like the idea that pacifism is passivism, right? That you're not doing anything, that you're saying, no, being a peacemaker is difficult. It requires a lot of thought. It requires intelligence. It requires tact. It requires self-control. It requires discipline, and it requires a lot of sacrifice. Like it's a very difficult path to be a peacemaker, to actually have peace be made as a result of what you do. Violence making is very easy. If you're just looking, if you just want to anger all the right people or wrong people, that's so easy. It is so easy to do. It's also very ineffective if you want to win. And I just, that's how I feel.
Well, you know, okay, and I know we're going to fast forward to the story, and we can backtrack. But okay, like for example, for Esther, like, and I point out, like Esther knew how long it had been since she'd seen the king, which again leads me to believe that she actually fell in love with this guy, and that she knew he was sleeping with other women. And I don't care if you are the queen and you got all these concubines, it hurts, right? If you love somebody, you know they're sleeping with somebody else, it hurts. I don't care what your culture is, it hurts. You know, and you can argue that with me. I don't care. It still hurts. So the end. and so when she gets with him, and when he raises his scepter and says, you know, Esther, what is it? And she walks before the king, and she invites him to a banquet. Like she knows he loves banquets, right? She goes right to her go-to move. It's like, what does he love? And it's like she knows he loves banquets. The one thing he loves to do is he loves to eat. He loves to drink. And she's like, come have a banquet with me. And he goes and he has a banquet, and instead of like unloading on him, like, what have you been doing the last 30 days, you know, Xerxes, because you haven't been with me, which is like what most wives would do, you know, because he's like, well, what do you want? What can I give you? And instead of asking for like jewelry, whatever, which again, most wives would be really ticked off at their husbands, they would want something. She doesn't do that. She's just like, you know what I really want? I would love to throw you another banquet tomorrow. You know, it's like, it's all about him. Like she gives everything to him. It's like, and this is something else like we forget as people, is that when you stop caring about your pain, your hurt, and you give yourself to somebody else, and you think about what is it that they need. Like he's still the king. He's got a lot of stress. He's got a lot of stuff on his mind. He still needs to be loved and comforted. And she knew that. And despite all this stuff going on, and I'm sure like Mordecai would be like, what are you doing, Esther? You know, we're going to die. And she's just like, I know my husband. Let me comfort and love my husband my way. and she knew how to do that. And instead of like dumping on him and, you know, you haven't talked to me in 30 days, if I got a lot to tell you, you know, Sasha over there has been really mean to me, she won't let me ride her horse, and now, you know, she doesn't do any of that. You know, she's just like serving him and giving to him. And it's like, we forget that the greatest gifts we can give to people is the gifts of love, tenderness, kindness, gentleness, and this is what melts ice. I mean, it's just like, it's the best thing we can do, and we forget that we just warm others so much with that, and it's what melted him. It's what actually saved the entire Jewish race. And it wasn't anything. It wasn't like powers of persuasion. It was the gentleness of a woman who just gave so much love to the king that he would have done anything for her. And that's what I think people forget, is that when Jesus talked about love, this is the type of love he was talking about. When we talk about being a foot washer, this is foot washing. You know, this is literally what it means to be Christ-like. And I think Esther was a really great example of that.
Aaron, Alex, you both have been so patient.
I don't really have that much to add on this particular section.
That's fair.
Ahead.
Alexander, anything for us? Okay, he's good. Cool. All right. So yeah, Esther wins him over with kindness, becomes a good wife, and is worried. I like that she approaches Mordecai and was like, this is where you almost get God mentioned. Almost. Close. Almost. God isn't mentioned in the book, but almost is like, pray for me, fast for me, because I'm about to do something very risky here.
Yeah, I'm walking down. You know, I don't know how this is going to turn out because you know, I'm gonna, you know, 3 days we're going to fast, and then I'm going to go see the king, and if he doesn't raise his scepter, I'm dead.
I want to bring this up just because I don't know that we'll get a better time to talk about it in all the rest of the books of the Bible. I'm thinking it over in my head. Fasting. You want to hit me with some quick thoughts about fasting, because this is kind of adds a layer to fasting that I think a lot of people don't see. Most of the time we do it for like health or just like personal introspection. This is actually like specifically trying to get a certain result and doing it on behalf of somebody else. So yeah, just anybody, any thoughts on that? Fasting?
Okay, I'll start because I actually fast for Purim every year. That's the only fast I do, and I actually do a holy fast for Purim.
For those listening, Purim is the Esther story. Like the reason we have it is because of Esther. So
yeah. So I actually do the fast, the fast before Purim, and I've done it since I was a child. And it's something that is just that I've done, but I do the fast to clear my head and to actually ask God to make me more like Esther, through gentleness, kindness, and to open me spiritually to things that I can do to be less, you know, angry, whatever. Like, it's just, you know, it really is. It's and I think it helps. I mean, I think it makes me. It's a perspective time for me, between me and God. And by the way, this is the first time I've ever told anybody I do that. So yeah,
it's good.
Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
Aaron, thoughts on fasting?
Twice in a row now. I don't really have any thoughts necessarily. I'm starting to try to incorporate fasting for health reasons, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the spiritual aspect that you're talking about.
Right. Well, I want to stress that, like, a lot of the rationale behind fasting, even within a spiritual framework, is the health ramifications. So this is not entirely divorced from each other. Something I learned from my studies of Eastern philosophy that I find is more incorporated into Christianity than people think is this connection between your physical and spiritual self. And this idea that, like, yeah, if I can fix my soul or fix my spirit by doing some things physically, and some of those, like eating. I won't lie, I have always struggled with fasting, and this is not one of those, like, I'm actually very highly, like, disciplined. When I say I'm struggling, I struggle to get a lot out of it. I think a lot of times it's like, how do I feel at the end? And I'm like, hungry? Like, does that count as, like, you know what I mean? Like, I try and I just don't feel like, I don't feel myself in like a different place spiritually. And I am a type of person who's receptive to that. There's things that I can do in my life. Like, acts of service, or even just like the style of prayer that I do leaves me like, there are certain things that I do when I pray that leave me more open to receiving that kind of one-on-one kinship with God that I'm looking for, that communication that I'm looking for. And fasting, like, I've tried it, and I have to think it's a me thing, that I'm just not as good at it, because I understand like the concept. I've heard it. It's not unique to Christianity or to Judaism. This is something that has, I find that a lot of the universal truths about God find themselves across all books. Like, one of the reasons that the golden rule is in like every faith is because there's just something spiritually true about it. And I think fasting is much the same. It finds itself in many of these different faiths. And I just got to think like, okay, there is something to this. And I just need to personally like get better at doing it. I feel like that, sometimes when I guess I never really preach, but when I talk with people, and with my studies and everything, it's like that offensive line coach who's never been an offensive line man. And so when I talk about fasting, I feel like a charlatan, because it's like, I've never done this. You know what I mean? Like, well, I know how to recommend it. I know like other writings about it, but me personally, like, I've never like pulled this off in the right way. So like, I do think that I would do it for the health ramifications. I do think it's a great way to practice discipline. If you just say like, it's the very like most base form. A lot of times people are like, all right, if you don't practice discipline in your daily life, and then it's like, quit smoking. Yeah, that's real funny. That's a good joke. But like, if there's something that you need to, that's like quitting smoking, or like quitting some kind of sin or pride or gossip, whatever it may be. In my case, responding with quick one-liners to people online. If there is something that like I become addicted to, and I find that like I practice better discipline in other areas of my life, I'm going to also have better discipline in these kinds of scenarios. So I do get something out of fasting. What I think I want is that like I fasted for 3 days and then God ascended me up to like Sinai or something. I haven't quite got there yet. I'm looking forward to it though. I really will still continue to try. But Esther has the Jews fast for her, Malachi fast for her. I think in this case, it's kind of a unique use of fasting, because most of the time we do it on behalf of ourselves, or to recognize an event or something like that. And in this case, she hasn't fasted like, hey, keep me in your thoughts. I believe that the reason this particular method of fasting is utilized, from what I have studied and looked up, is that this is what it does is it shows self-sacrifice. And this is actually the way that protesters use fasting, in their revolutions, is to say, if I was against you, I could just throw a brick through your window. Like, if this was an anti-you movement, that's what I would be doing. But instead, what I'm showing is I'm giving up something. I'm willing to forego something, so that you understand that what I'm doing is a real thing. So when people go out and they say, the Jews have given up food, and Esther's like, I know why that is. It's because they're worried about what I'm going to tell you. And they want to make like, they're thinking of me, and they're worried that this is very different than, for example, if they were to be like, go out and smash your neighbor's window, and if everybody smashes a window, they'll be like, why is this happening? Oh, that's because of me. All of a sudden I view you negatively. Whereas if you're fasting, I view you positively. You're making some kind of voluntary sacrifice, which is mimicking what you're doing spiritually. Or actually also in this case, physically, you're making a sacrifice, a risk, to say like, I'm going to come out with the truth, and this could be very bad for me, like, because of how everything's sized up. Going against Haman, I talked about the payment earlier, is forfeiting that payment, right? Like, this is the issue. Like, Haman wants this. As soon as you reject it, all of a sudden that free tax money doesn't come free anymore. Those free conscripts don't come free anymore. And this is a risk that they have to take, which is also why, in case you wonder why the end of Esther gets to be such a bloodbath, I hope my explanation of Haman's position helps you understand that all of a sudden now, as people are like, well, we're not paying taxes anymore. Let's be in a state. Now we're back to war. And it's like, okay, well, then it's back to war. And how all that ended up. Like, that's war. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting, the use of fasting as a revolutionary tactic. Using it in this case in the Bible is interesting, because I think I'm so used to reading about it in terms of spiritual observance.
I think like because like a lot of people like me fast for Purim, and and for people who aren't familiar with Purim, after for the Feast of Esther, I mean it's my favorite. It's like my favorite time to feast, because what you do is like you eat a lot of sweets, which I love, and you just like party. I mean, that's, you drink a lot of wine, you eat a lot of sweets. It's like the Feast of Esther is exactly what you would think it would be, and so it's a great time. But like before that, like you go into your fast, and the thing is like and I tend to think this might be more like what was probably going on was, she was in a very opulent place, and it's very easy when you're in opulence to let petty slights and small differences really weigh you down. So fasting, and this is where I find fasting really helps me, and where I actually do look forward to fasting during the time before Purim, is because at first, when you're first fasting, it's okay. But once you start getting kind of hungry, it starts to get to you. And then after a while, it really starts to get to you. And then you start trying to figure out ways to get your mind off of fasting. And really the only thing that really does work is prayer and your fellowship with God. And you start finding out that like after a while you actually, your anger and your petty slights start going away, and you start concentrating on more positive things and ways you can reconcile things in your life. And I'm thinking, like in Esther's case, and with the Jews and such, that time, those 3 days were really spent. By the time they got to the third day, things that were probably a really good idea the first day, they probably had dismissed by the third day. And they were probably, because 3 days is a big deal with God. Like 3 means a big deal with him. And by the third day, they had probably gotten to a reconciliation to what was the right course of action with him. He needed those 3 days so they could get right with him. And I think because God doesn't do anything by accident. And so I tend to believe that that's probably more likely than not why he did the 3 days, to help them reconcile everything emotionally and get them all in the right headspace for what was going to happen next.
So what you're saying is, don't eat, but pray and love.
Eat, pray, love. Don't eat, pray, love. That's cute. That is very cute. All right. So what actually really set, I think it's funny because obviously Esther reveals herself and he's like, okay, well, I'm not going to kill him anymore. That, because I like you. And therefore, if you as a person, I love this because it's very important. What's the number one way to knock out bigotry? Being friends with somebody you would be bigoted against.
Yeah.
I didn't make the connection until literally just now, but the whole thing kicked off because Haman was slighted by Mordecai and took it out, an individual slight out on everyone.
Yeah.
And then Xerxes is about facing on the decree because he has an individual relationship with one person. That's an interesting parallel.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's really, it's the collectivist versus individualist, see every human being for who they are mindset. It's so easy to just be like, I mean, I think unfortunately many of us probably have friends that are like this, that are just like, oh, all women are like this, or all men are like this, or all Jews are like this, or all, black people are like this, or
anybody in there,
foreigners are like this, Mexicans are like this. Oh, well, maybe not everybody, but 99% of whatever. Well, I tell you what, is even like, first of all, it's rarely true when we talk about 99%, but let's say it is.
You don't know them all. You don't know 99%. You maybe know 10.
Right. and these are judgments based on like personal experience and like your own personal whatever. But like, I think the more important thing is, even if it was 99% act in this way that you don't like, does that mean just screw the 1%? Right? Like as soon as you know one person that's affected by something bad, that should inspire you to then be like, I don't want anything bad to happen to that person because that's my friend. I'm not going to authorize a collective law against them, or,
Yeah.
Because I love
keep going, because Lot made this argument to save Sodom and Gomorrah. This is literally what Lot did to bargain down to save Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Go ahead.
Yeah,
You're making the argument.
And so I think what you do is God, I mean, and in the case with Sodom and Gomorrah, God pulls the individuals out of there who need out of there.
Yeah,
and
but
so
he says, let me find somebody. You can't destroy it if somebody good's in there. Yeah.
Right. As long as there's somebody's got some hope in there. And so I think that there is when we see this with his thankfully Xerxes, as thick-headed as he is, has at least the capacity to be like, well, I love Esther. Esther's Jewish. So killing all, like, and I'm grateful for this.
By the way, Mordecai saved my life. Right?
Yeah.
We found the whole thing is like,
yeah.
I don't. Mordecai saved my life. The whole reason I'm alive is because Mordecai discovered this plot to kill me, and he saved my life. And by the way, I never thanked him until like a couple of days ago when I found out. It's like, yeah. So like, I'm alive because of him. So yeah.
Your life is. I am so glad I completely spaced that. I
was raised on this story. This is good. This is my childhood story.
Yeah. Couple assassins were going to take Xerxes out, and Mordecai hears it and blows the whistle on it, right? Yeah. Which is, by the way, fun fact, according to the FBI itself, still the majority of botched or foiled terrorism attempts is from the terrorists themselves who decide they don't want to go through with it. And I think that this is something that or somebody who's in on the plan. And you could see why somebody like Mordecai might be in on that plan, why these people would speak about it around him.
Yeah.
Why would Mordecai like this guy? Jews are second-class citizens in Persia. This isn't a good, it's a king. This guy subjugates you. This is, and so I think that like with him revealing that, and like you said, that's a Jew. My life got saved by a Jew. Okay. The more you look at the world and realize how blessed your life is by people who are nothing like you.
Yeah.
The more you begin to go like, oh, okay, well, then people different than me are actually very good. Right? Like this is a good thing that they exist. Our lives are made beneficial, like in countless ways. There's a book, I think it's called Thanks a Million or Thanks 1,000. It's about a guy who tries to thank everybody who's responsible for getting his cup of coffee in the morning. And it leads to so many people are responsible for your cup of coffee that thanking them becomes unrealistic. Thanking every single person who is responsible for bringing that to you becomes unrealistic. You'd have to travel all over the world. He tries to thank all the people, and the journey is fascinating. It's a book that's written mostly about gratitude for everything that you have in life. Because if that's true about your coffee, think about your house. Think about the libertarian example, the pen, right? Think about your pencil. Think about your computers. NVIDIA, right? Isn't that now that's the biggest company in the US, and it's a foreigner founded it, right? Like I just read this yesterday. But like amazing ways that your life is benefited by people who are nothing like you, and thank God for them, and thank God for that. And so thank God that Xerxes sees the blessings that the Jews have given him, both with Esther and Mordecai. And maybe it's just Esther and Mordecai. Maybe you just have two people, but you know what? That's enough for you to go, yeah, I'm not going to kill all of them just because this guy's paying me a butt ton of money. Like that's good. And this is what it takes to get rid of your bigotry sometimes, is being kind to bigots, is showing them that they are worthy of love, even when they are undeserving, even when they are sinners and evil, and to go, okay, listen, you've got a problem. You don't know you've got a problem, but I'm going to treat you better than you deserve. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where they flip sides because of you. Yeah. And this is something, it's the Daryl Davis technique to a core. Obviously, we could debate that all day, but it's something that I happen to love. That this is, I like being, for me, this happens often. It's hard for me to defy it a lot because I'm a white male Christian, right? Like I don't have a lot, I'm a WASP, right? I don't have a lot of interesting, like people aren't bigoted against me generally. However, I find that my brand of Christianity reaches to people who are I'll just say extremely bigoted against Christians, right? Like they have some kind of bigoted view of what Christianity is. I relate to them. I understand them. I talk to them. I don't push them away. I treat them better than they treat my faith. I treat their beliefs better than they treat my faith. Maybe it's not deserved. Maybe it's not the justice that I could give to them and just hit them in the face when they try to hit me in the face. But this is how you deal with your enemies as a Christian. You turn the other cheek. They take your shirt. You offer them your coat. You give them more. Right. And in giving them to them, who is going to take somebody's shirt that also offers you their coat? That feels terrible, right? Like nobody does this. Are you going to slap somebody in the face that doesn't feel like slapping you back? People don't do this. This is not human behavior. And so when you have somebody who treats you with love like Esther and Mordecai do, Xerxes makes the very unpleasant and expensive decision to side with the people he loves over the people who bribe him. And
right.
that's meaningful.
And see, and this is what I think is like the greatest story about like Esther is that you know, it starts with, you know, King Xerxes, and here you have this like overindulgent drunk dude who just makes some terrible decisions in his life with his family, with the people that are close to him. I mean, he just like does like these terrible decisions. And by the way, he lets his, what I like to call his bros, you know, he lets his bros get him into, you know, getting rid of his wife, and they're all like drinking and doing all this stuff. And then they all go off to war, woohoo. And then they lets his bros talk him into this beauty contest and blah, 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 blah. And he doesn't have any core values. And now he's gotten to a point where he gets this woman who never gives up on him. She's kind, she's gentle, she's sweet, and she fasts, and she does like the right thing. She goes to God and she just says, you know, help me out here, because I, you know, if you're saying this is why I'm here, you've got to help me out. You've got to tell me what to do. And he says, fast for 3 days. And she says, well, that's really not what I thought you'd tell me. I would be my first reaction to be like, really? I would think you tell me to go climb in bed with him or something awesome like that. Instead, you tell me not to eat pizza for 3 days. That sucks. But okay, let's do this. You know, and then at the end, he says, okay, you know, now have him come to a banquet, be gentle to him, be kind to him. Have him come to another banquet, be gentle, be kind to him. Warm his heart, you know. Don't tell him about your terrible day, you know. And it's like everything that is counterintuitive to everything we think. And instead of him getting drunk and stupid and doing what he did at the last, you know, like we know what he does at parties, he doesn't do this. Instead, you know, he's staying up all night reading Chronicles, reminding himself what Mordecai did for him, and he wants to start doing kindness. Like he decides to have a parade for Mordecai, right? You know, and then he has another, you know, banquet with Esther, and then he finds out like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have her killed and everybody else killed. This is not a good thing, and he actually leaves to go like, you know, clear his head. And some people say he went to go get the soldiers to go get Haman, you know, to take out Haman, and that's when Haman says, oh my God, Esther, I have like really made a mess of things, you know, stop this. And Esther is just kind of sitting there, like taking all this in when, you know, King comes back in. And then of course the old king comes back because he sees Haman, like, you know, hanging on his wife. And that's like the end of Haman. You know, so he wasn't really that good of a guy, you know, but he did get some values there. So you can see like she's making positive changes in this guy's life. So I mean, you know, you can't expect miracles, but just like with Nebuchadnezzar, you know, baby steps, and you know, he explains, look, I can't change my law. I can't change my law. I mean, once a king makes a law, I can't change a law. But what I can do is I can make another law, you know, to help you all, you know, with this edict that I put out there to have you all, you know, genocide. So you know, we're gonna give you the tools that you need to fight back, and so that helped out. I mean, this was, you know, it was a good ending, because a lot of people decided not to engage in the genocide. Those who did decide to engage in the genocide didn't turn out too well for them. So,
right. So Haman, what gets Haman killed?
Haman killed. Some say an angel pushed him onto Esther. That's just folklore.
So hey, what's funny is Hester at this moment has not really said anything other than, I'm Jewish, please don't kill my people.
Well,
And
she actually tells she tells the king. Haman's the one who
right,
yeah, Haman because apparently the king is he's so oblivious. Who's going to kill you, Esther? I don't know who's going to kill you. I don't know what's going on. And she's like, do you even pay attention to the rules you make?
Yeah. So lets him know, like, hey, your advisor here has been trying to kill me. Please don't kill me.
Yeah.
And what really sets Xerxes off is not just the fact that Haman did that, although surely that is coming, but having the nerve to approach Esther and be like, oh, please, like, wouldn't you please act in my benefit? I know I tried to kill you and genocide your whole people, but won't you please take mercy on? And I like that Esther doesn't even have to be like, kill this guy. Xerxes is just like, no, absolutely not. Like, we're like, you will not be like disrespecting somebody so much that you tried to genocide them. And the nerve to going up to them to be like, please, my life is in your hands. Like, the appropriate thing for Haman to do, and one of the reasons it set him off, would to be to talk to Xerxes and just being like, I made a mistake. It was evil. It was wrong. Whatever. Explain yourself. But what he's trying to do is undercut Xerxes.
Yeah.
Go to Esther and be like, hey, he listens to you. Would you mind like putting in a good word for me? Yeah. Which is completely inappropriate when you've decided to kill somebody. This is the equivalent of like if you are an attempted murderer, to go to the person you tried to kill and be like, could you tell like everybody that I didn't do that, or that like maybe it was like okay, or just like a misunderstanding or something. Just lie to the cops. Wouldn't that be like, that is so wildly inappropriate with somebody who you've tried to kill, you know? So I understand the frustration is ultimately this is what Xerxes like, hey, you know those pikes he had us craft? Why don't you go ahead and stick his body on there instead of Mordecai? That's because I like Mordecai and I don't like this guy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too with Haman's gallows, and that's the thing, because Haman constructed the gallows the night before, right? He and his wife is like, put up those gallows and let's finally kill Mordecai. Oh, we're so sick of this guy, right? And while they're constructing this like massive gallows that apparently they can see throughout the whole land, right? I mean, like they construct this gallows from hell, right? It's like the most massive thing ever. They constructed, and Haman's whole deal is that he's going to put Mordecai on this gallows, and meanwhile, like on the other side of the kingdom, Xerxes is having the chronicles read to him, where he's finally finding out that Mordecai actually saved his life, and he's like, oh my gosh, this is something like I totally forgot about this, and so Haman comes walking into the court, and Xerxes turns to his to the guy reading him the chronicles, saying, well, so who's in the court, like? And he goes, oh, well, Haman's here. And it's like, oh yeah, bring Haman on in. And Haman comes in and he's like, hey, Haman, like, what would you do? Like, how would you honor the person that pleases the king? And Haman's like, oh, I put him on a horse and I put the king's robes on him and I march him through the streets saying, this is the person that the king loves. And he's like, well, yeah, do that to Mordecai. And Haman's like, what? And, and like Haman's going in there to like ask Mordecai, ask Xerxes to put Mordecai, give him permission to kill Mordecai. And it's just like, well, this isn't working out, And so it's like, Haman's just like trying to figure out like how to get around this whole gallows that he knows the whole town's talking about. And now he's got to go honor the guy he wants to kill. And it's just like, and you can already see like, this is not going to end well for Haman. And the fact that, and this is where like my grandmother always said, don't die on Haman's gallows, because the fact that in the end, the king orders Haman hung from his own gallows. It's like, this is where revenge gets you. This is where anger gets you. This is where hatred will get you. The person who was killed in those gallows was Haman, not Mordecai. When you hate and when you have vengeance, when you do that, usually this is where hatred gets you. Is that it could be metaphysical or it can be actual, but you tend to die in your own gallows. It's like, don't build them. This was like the best example God could give on why you don't do that. Why let it go, boy, let it go. Because this, you have no idea what is going on behind the scenes while you're building those gallows. And what Haman didn't know while he was building that gallows to Mordecai is that God was planning to bless him. And he may not have agreed with that blessing, but that wasn't for Haman to decide. You know, Haman had so much hate, he was blinded by everything good Mordecai was doing, you know, and in the end.
Aaron or Alexander, anything you want to add there? We're almost to the end here.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything to add here.
Cool. I guess the only thing after this is really the last two chapters are a bit
Slaughter.
bloodbath here.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you find all the conspirators who are in on this to genocide the Jews here, and it's not a small fraction of people, as well as all of Haman's sons.
I guess the 10 of Haman's sons, yeah.
Yeah, as Haman's sons, as well as, you know, and what I assume were a lot of who I would, you know, I guess let's call them Agagites, you know, like these people that come not ethnic Canaanites, because that's just Semites. They're all the same, right? Like these are people who come from that. Let's kill our enemies and let's use whatever big power it is to crush whatever little problem it is that we have, and whatever little spat we have. I think it's fascinating because this oftentimes comes up today when people play political games, is that we find that we have somebody who should be our brothers. Like in this case, they're like genetically brothers, right?
Yeah.
But it like, even in this, like we're all brothers and sisters in God, right? So like people who should be our brothers, but our hatred overflows for them so much that we decide to use and abuse this power of somebody who doesn't necessarily like us very much. And we pull a Haman. We just say, you know what? As long as it crushes these people, do whatever. You know, in the case of Haman, I'll keep selling out. We'll keep sending you our soldiers, our firstborn children, our money, whatever. Keep taking it. Just as long as you crush this neighbor I have next to me, because we have some stupid feud over some dumb thing from a long time ago, right?
Well,
like,
and can we talk about just for a second, like, and I'm glad you said some stupid thing, because let's really talk about how anger, hatred, and grudge holding starts. Because I think God, like, this is like, again, Esther is a really great Bible story about how the pettiness of man can escalate to a point that it's just tragic. Because what was Haman? What caused this all to happen? I mean, what was it that Haman was really upset about? Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. I mean, think about how insane this is, that it got so locked in his head, that the hamster wheel kept going so much in his head that he actually wanted to genocide an entire race of people because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. Like, he's Haman, he's sitting in the court. Like, why did he care if Mordecai bowed to him? It's like, this is the kind of stuff where it's like we get stuff in our heads that is so ridiculous about other people that it's like, stop it. Sometimes your anger is justified, but a lot of times it's not. You know, and when you get your hatred towards other people, you have to really check yourself to figure out, what is it exactly I'm angry at? And I wish Haman would have really checked out, like, what exactly are you, like, a good therapist really would have gotten to Haman, right? He was in need of a good therapist, because if this is what you're genociding people over, trust me, Haman, it's not because Mordecai didn't bow to you, right?
Yeah. Everything that you just said, I think it's perfect. It's we should be loving our enemies, even, but especially loving our brothers. I mean, we should be loving everybody. And absolutely, like, resist that temptation to, we talked about it earlier, but just the collectivism, like the ability to just paint, like Mordecai is representative of all these Jews. First of all, the thing that he's upset about is like actually a good thing. Like, Mordecai is, you shouldn't be bowing before people, human beings, as well as he saved the king's life. Like, there's no complaints about Mordecai that are valid, right? Like, this is why, I mean, you'll see from, and I loathe to make things political, but it's just sometimes politics is so engrossing, it's hard to get away from this. I want you to understand, I'm not talking about this politically. I mean to more talk about this like phenomenon psychologically. But when somebody will just post on like Facebook and just like, here's a loud barbecue, and just being like, I'm just frustrated about all this. And I'm like, really? Like, this is what it takes for you to all of a sudden hang out like the build the wall sign, is the fact that like there's a barbecue going on or like a quinceanera at your park. Like, that's what you're upset at? Like, really? This is what's gotten under your skin, is like just watching a cultural, like, right, a tradition, a festival? Like, you're really upset by this? Like, this is not something you should even be upset about. And
Right.
even if it were, treat it like even if Mordecai disrespected him, actually, like spit on his shoe, right? Like spit on him. Okay, deal with Mordecai. This is not all the Jews' problem. Like, this is one that when people will point out, like, look at this bad behavior from, and this is one that does go across political aisles, like the whole white people must be stopped. Look what this white person's doing. Look at this Karen. Look what they're doing. Okay, yes, genuinely bad behavior. Karens need to be dealt with. That doesn't mean all white people are Karens, right? Like, watch this, like, oh, watch this girl getting sassy. Oh, this black women must be stopped. Okay, not all black women are like that. Like, I don't know, like the fact that people's minds just, we do, and I understand why this exists. I love neurology and I read a lot about this. So I understand why your brain forms this pattern. And this is why I think Christianity, to me, is like inherently an unnatural faith, but it is still a very good thing. You can find things in nature. Like, I believe that you will come to peace with nature as a result of this, but the actions that you take are very unnatural. Your brain wants you to collectivize things. Your brain tries to simplify a complex world. So it's very easy for your brain to just go, you know what? I've been stiffed by four Hispanic families in a row. Hispanic people can't tip. And that's like your brain. And I can tell you from running restaurants for a long time, like, this is a lot of people's mentalities. It's not on purpose. It's something that your brain does when they talk about like having like some kind of inherent racism or inherent problem. This is kind of what happens. And so you need to actively recognize what your brain is naturally trying to do and then work against that and just be like, hey, everybody has that initial feeling. And if you don't have that feeling, that means it went through and it got past your defenses and you didn't detect it. Nobody is just magically not this way. Your brain is constantly trying to fit together patterns. It's actually literally how we measure intelligence, is by pattern recognition, how quickly you pick up on these things. So like, if you just say like, oh, I've never even had that thought before, that actually indicates that you are like brain dead level stupid or that you're like refusing to confront something. And so like, while Haman may seem like in fact, Haman does seem like this evil, over the top character in this book.
Well, he really is. He tried to genocide. That's a no-go. That's my no-go line.
But how many people are Hamans in our lives? While he may seem over the top, Haman has the power to do it. We have seen a lot of people on social media that, if they had the power, would genocide entire groups of people. Yeah. They just don't have the power to do that. They don't have the influence to do that. And so it's terrifying when you see somebody like that get cozied up to political power, because we've seen what Hamans will try to do to people. And so to me, like, I think this is so important to recognize, like, the lesson from this book is just being like, don't be, you said it at the beginning, don't be a Haman, right? Yeah. Like, when you collectivize people, when you get angry and judge large groups of people for what you see as an infraction of a few, something else Haman has done. He's got his wires crossed as far as what's virtue and what's vice. And he just naturally reacts towards vice because all of these cultural virtues must be a bad thing because the Jews do them, right? And I dislike them. And so therefore everything that they do is wrong, even if it would ordinarily be something that I considered right. It's very like this xenophobic thing. And we all have this kind of tendency to try to deal with our problems in this crushing, bruising, violent way. It's hard for some people to even understand philosophically how kindness can be used as a tool. They only see matters of how do we force people to be good? If it's not with violence, then what else? Right? Like, there's no other way. There's no other tool in their box. Like, I listened to a debate between two relatively intelligent people who were debating like when violence is useful and how to deal with this. And neither of them could come up with the idea that maybe being kind to people would work on some level, like at all. They're just like how much violence is permissible, or if we're not using violence, then it's okay, and who cares, right? Like that's, to them, there was nothing in between any of that. And so I think for me, I do just encourage people to read this book and just be like, unless you want things to end in a bloodbath for you or for the other guys, love your neighbors, love your enemies, counter your brain when it tells you to hate your enemies. I get the gut reflex still. I'm not trying to preach from this like high and mighty place. My gut reflex when I see somebody take a crack at me on social media is to crack at them back. And if I am not in a good, healthy mindset, I will, and I'll feel bad about it for the rest of the day. And I'll basically write off people that I should be trying to reach. You know, we all have this, and it's important that we recognize it and recognize that our best option for success comes with a lot of hard work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of kindness. It may seem unnatural, but this is what makes you a hero in the story of Esther. And I would argue that's what can make you the hero in your own story as well. You may not feel heroic because nobody sits down and writes in the book of the Bible about it. Right. But man, like the dad in the prodigal son is a hero. He's not even a real person. You're a real person, right? Like if you are acting with kindness and doing some good things, you're doing the right thing. You know, and whether somebody writes a book about it or not, that's beside the point. God is going to view you, we talk about this, individually. He's going to judge you individually. He's going to look at you individually. And so if you say like, man, I tried my best to be a Mordecai and an Esther instead of a Haman, I think you're going to be viewed positive. Or you know what, Vashti instead of a Haman.
Yeah,
great. God is going to view you positively because of that, and we should strive to recognize that that is a very good thing, as opposed to trying to figure out how to make Xerxes squash all the right people.
You know, thank you. That's, and you know, and these are really easy things that we can do in our own life. I mean, this is not like the great thing about the story of Esther is that the story of Esther is not something that is like none of us can be like this. This is a really easy lift for all of us. And I, you know, like, and I'll give an example like this, because you know, and this is something that, again, I was raised by a very wise woman, my grandmother, and I always like talk about my grandmother because she is literally the wisest person I ever met in my life. And she was so kind, and she was so, and that's the thing that I love about her. She was so kind. And one thing everybody will tell you about my grandmother is she was the most gentle, kindest woman that anybody ever met. And I'm so honored that of all the people that could have raised me, it was her. And I wish if I could be anything like her, that would be the greatest honor of my life. And I'm nothing like her, but I try really hard. And one of the things like she taught me, and I try to do this, like when I'm in a, you know, like in relationships with people, is that you know, like when things start getting heated, and you know, like, and we do this, like, well, with our friendships, with our work relationships, in personal relationships, to be in a relationship, and there comes a point in a discussion sometimes, whether it's on social media or it's in person or whatever, where somebody will say something, and the immediate reaction is to lash, right? To be a Haman, to lash out, right? And one of the things that my grandmother taught me was that moment you feel that anger come up and you want to lash out and you want them to know you're mad, she says, step back and ask yourself, where are they hurting? And ask, you know, and try to see it from their point of view, and ask them, is this where you're hurting? You know, instead of telling them why you're mad, ask them if this is where you're hurting, and see if and see if maybe, you know, like, let them know that you love them and that you care about them, and find out, because sometimes they're lashing at you because they're hurting, which is, it's just literally what Esther did, is that, you know, she went to the king first, and she loved him, you know, recognizing that this is a man that had a lot of stress in his life, and she didn't go to him with all of her problems, and she has some pretty big problems, starting with the annihilation of her people. And she handled it very, very well. Like, she was very kind, very gentle, very good to him. And I think this is a really great lesson that we can learn from him, because you brought it up with Haman. Like, Haman, instead of going to Xerxes and saying, whoa, dude, I so messed this up, he goes and throws himself on Esther and says, you got to take care of this. And it's like, dude, that was like such the wrong thing to do. It was such a reactionary issue. But then again, he reacted over everything. But so did Xerxes. I mean, you have two reactionaries, and they both reacted exactly the way they should, and they both had bad results, right? And this is what
Yeah.
God is trying to tell us. It's like, stop doing that. Stop it. Kindness wins out. Gentleness wins out. If you pay attention to the people that you're dealing with, and you really pay attention to them, you can make an impact on them. I mean, this is, Jesus talked about that all the time, like paying attention to people. And he tried to teach his apostles that, but they never got it. But,
I like what you alluded to it, but kind of like being Haman's therapist, right? Like a little bit, like if you see somebody heading down there, like talk to them. An example that I think is underused is the Nicodemus from the New Testament, somebody who could easily have become a villain and was, functionally, for a while, but just Christ dealt with him, gave him the answers to questions, treated him a little better than he deserved, and suddenly that became a good guy. Problematic and all, right? Like similar with like Xerxes or with Nebuchadnezzar, right? We read Daniel already. Another problematic person who you can make your friend with some kindness.
Well, think about Paul. With Paul, what a problematic person he was. Can you imagine getting the call from God to go talk to Paul because he's had a conversion? Yeah, right.
Right.
Can you imagine? And because you and I, we know the same people, and we're involved in some of the same, part of my language, shit storms. Can you imagine like getting, like any of them getting a call from God saying, go visit Paul because he's had, Saul, he's had this conversion and he's not going to kill you anymore. Like they're going to be like, yeah, right. Not.
It's not going to work that way. Yeah.
And by the way, then they get to Paul, they're going to have a little talk with him anyways, and they're going to tell him everything he's done wrong, and they're going to make him admit all of his wrongs first before they help him out one bit, because he's going to admit it because he owes that to them. And Bob, it's like they're not going to be forgiving, and it's like no, see, when you see somebody, even if they've wronged you, you should not even remember that. It should be a big hug and excitement to see somebody that you haven't seen, and that look, the fact that they've come to God, it's like that's an excitement, that's a moment there. There's, you shouldn't be living like that in your head. You should be, every time you see anybody you haven't seen or anybody that God has sent you to, you should be always excited to see them, because that's your brother in Christ. That's somebody that God loves as much as you do. There's always that excitement to see them. And if you're not excited to see people, that's a you problem.
It's a sign of disconnect for me when you say, I think some people, I'm like, well, everyone's your brother and sister in Christ. And they're like, yeah, but what? And I'm like, maybe brother and sister doesn't mean much to you, but I guess it means a lot to me. So I guess, Aaron, any thoughts on Esther?
It's a good book. I like the contrast to the fact that because it doesn't directly mention God, its place in the Bible. It's just it's an interesting book because of that. The fact that it was deemed worthy of inclusion.
Twice. The Apocrypha too, right? Like, it's doubling down. Weird. Yeah. Alexander, any thoughts on Esther? Well, I appreciate you all joining us today. Patty, Aaron, Alexander, you guys were here personally. I appreciate it. A lot of viewers again on this one. And again, a rarity for these things. We grew in people the longer we went on. So people are finding this they're not just clicking and going like, oh, okay, that's enough of that. How is this still going on? So similar to the Exodus discussion, there's a lot of interest here. I just want to say, if you're listening, thank you so much. I really appreciate the viewership. These things have been doing really well. For me, the metrics aren't, I'm not turning this, I haven't uploaded it to podcast players. This isn't like, this is just a way for I want to reach people with Bible studies and give people our thoughts. And if you want to be part of the Love First Christians, it's a great community. The link is in the description. If you are not sold on the Bible, all the more reason. I want to create a place that fosters questions and great criticisms from people who are not Christians, as well as from people who are Christians, because my goodness, if Lamentations can make it into the Bible, you are allowed to criticize God and have some questions for yourself. Clearly, like, so this to me is one of those where you just say it's okay to not understand everything and to have imperfect understandings. It's encouraged. It's, if you doubt your faith, if you're wondering about your faith, please come. This is not, there's no money involved. It's not a scheme. It's just a nice little Discord group. It's something that is growing. It's, as I've noticed from our numbers, we are reaching more and more people. And if you'd like to join, that link is in the description. We just love to have you and talk with you. But yeah, Patty, Aaron, Alexander, thank you so much for joining me here. To anybody else who's listening, it was just a blessing to get together and talk about Esther. We will get together in the group and decide what to study next time. And like I said, if you want to be a part of that conversation, the link is open and we'd love to see you. Everybody, be like Esther. Don't be like Haman. That's the thing. Don't be like Haman. Don't create your own gallows, guys. Thanks so much, and we look forward to talking to you again.